This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Welcome to Moments of Clarity with Tiffany Werner, licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. Moments of Clarity's mission is to educate and end the stigma on mental health through the inspirational stories of our exceptional guests. You can join in the show by calling Tiffany toll-free at 866-826-1340 or on Facebook and Twitter at MOC with Tiffany. Now, here's Tiffany Werner.
Hello, and thanks for listening. This is Moments of Clarity. My name is Tiffany Werner. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I'm your host. And today we're going to be talking about how PTSD and this pandemic are kind of coincide together. And I got a fantastic guest coming up. But first, I always want to say hi to Ed, who's running the show and making everything happen every day. And thank you so much, Ed. And how are you doing?
Staying sterile every day.
This sounds funny, but but staying safe.
That too.
I miss seeing your face. I'm not in the studio today, but we're still making the show happen, of course, because getting the message out there is number one priority. And Ed's still in the studio and doing the job and making sure everyone gets the news and gets the reports and gets their information. And Ed, I'm very proud of you. And thanks for being there.
Thank you very much, and you're welcome.
And so today we're going to be talking about PTSD and how it's affecting some of our veterans. And I mean, this is an odd pandemic, and this it's changing so rapidly. You have to just be on guard all the time, and a lot of our veterans are having some triggers. And my guest today is retired Sergeant, U.S. Army. He's a survivor of traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and veteran suicide. And this is so hard on so many of my veteran friends, as well as my guest today. And I want to welcome to Moments of Clarity, Eric Donoho. Hi, Eric.
Hey, Tiffany.
Thanks
how's
so
it going?
For being here. It's going.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here and especially sharing your journey and I know that it's hard on a lot of my friends that have served in combat and this sudden change, loss of friends and family suddenly, and so let's talk a little bit about your journey, just to tell our listeners, a little bit about your background, and then kind of go into where we are today.
So I'm a retired sergeant from the U.S. Army. I was retired in February of 2009, basically for getting blown up too many times while I was deployed to Iraq. And I was deployed to Iraq in October of 2006 through November of 2007. And while deployed, I got blown up 3 times. And
wow.
so,
when you say blown up, what does that mean?
IEDs. So, I 2 IEDs and 1 EFP. And EFP is an explosively formed projectile. So if you think like a manhole sewer plate, they'll use something like that and pack a whole bunch of explosives behind it. And when the charge goes off, it turns that sewer cover into like a solid slug of metal that's meant to go through armor. So wow. That was the last one. But, over the course, and the big thing about it is, and the challenge at the time, and even still today, is that, while I lived through those things, and I came out physically unharmed as far as having all my, limbs and and I'm not burned and I'm not scarred in any way from those blasts, it took me a long time to realize the amount of damage that was done to my brain while those, when those blasts happened. And so when that's why brain injuries are so difficult, because you look in the mirror and everything looks the same, but, you're not firing on all cylinders anymore. So it's like you're constantly, you're looking at yourself going, what's wrong? Why isn't something going on? Because you forget about the injury because there's nothing there to remind you.
It's a lot with mental health illness and mental health stuff, and that we don't see it. It's invisible, and a lot of people can look at someone and say, oh my gosh, they're fine, and it's invisible, and they look physically fine, but deep down they're struggling and living with something that can be very challenging and very life altering. And first of all, and I know that I can't help it, but a lot of people with your experience, I want to say thank you for your service and thank you for what you put yourself through and what you went through for our country. And I know that there's no right way to say that, because a lot of veterans are kind of saying like, well, what do we say to that? But I just wanted to still to say thank you. I'm the daughter of a veteran and from Vietnam, U.S. Marine Corps. So just when he died from Agent Orange. So my heart goes out to anyone that served our country and put their lives on the line.
Full disclosure to the audience, we know each other a little bit.
Right.
I didn't know that about your dad. I'm sorry to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that he had passed.
Oh no, thank you. Yeah, a little bit ago.
Agent Orange is it's nasty what it's doing to that generation of warfighters. From that to Parkinson's to a number of other things. So sorry to hear that.
Well, it's a cute story, but like with a tragic ending. But my father and my uncle, my mom's brother, were best friends fighting in Vietnam. In the Marine Corps, they were both first lieutenant, like platoon leaders, frontline. My father's earned 3 Purple Hearts and several medals, where it takes like 2 plaques highly decorated, as well as my uncle. And they were best friends, served right side by side. They were on deployment, and at the time, my mother was a Delta Airlines stewardess. So, like, when I say airline stewardess, back in the day when, they had to fit a little description, like, whatever. And so they went to deployment in Spain, and so my mother flew my grandmother, her mom, over to Spain to go visit my uncle, and he brought his best friend, aka my dad, and so basically they said when my dad met his best friend's sister, aka my mom, my uncle's sister, get it, that they went to a bullfight, and when the matador killed the bull, they didn't even notice it because they were so gaga over each other, and yada yada yada, here I am. Yada yada yada, here I am. And the sad part about it is that my dad passed away from Agent Orange in 2001, and my uncle died from Agent Orange in 2013 from fighting side by side in Vietnam. They're right together. The same thing killed them, just a little bit different timeline, but it was the same.
Yeah.
They survived. Like 3 Purple Hearts and everything, and then you go and survive all of that time, and then it kills you years later. It's kind of a bummer, but to put it lightly. However, I experienced what it was like for them to go through PTSD and how they handled trauma, and it must be so hard for you right now as a veteran that served in combat to be going through this during all this uncertainty during this time.
Well, So real quick, touch on, what you're talking about with your dad and your uncle. I heard this quote, and I think it's, there's a post 9/11 organization called Team Rubicon, and they have where they tell this story about how their organization got started. And one of the things that they said is, there's something to the effect that, the veteran can leave the war, like you can leave the war, but the war never leaves you. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, I think is uniquely understood in the veteran world and within their families, right? I mean, right. that deployment, that one deployment, that 6 deployments, whatever it is going to live with that family and that veteran for generations, for as long as they're alive. So, and now to turn it to, what's going on, because we're living in some crazy times right now.
Right.
Like right now, we're both at home doing this show. My air conditioner went out 2 days ago, and now we're having to navigate how do you bring in a repair guy to fix your air conditioner, like in the state of COVID and like being high risk, because
right.
Not only, do I have those issues, but about 3 years ago, I got diagnosed with a host of autoimmune issues that, they're not really sure what's going on. So they lumped me into a classification called fibromyalgia, basically, which is just saying, hey, we need to classify you for something to be able to charge insurance, but we have no idea what it is. So you fall into this category. But basically, my immune system is just not very good, and my body likes to attack itself. So,
So having an air conditioner guy come in your house right now is pretty high risk.
Yes. Well, yeah, but I mean, you can't stop life, right? I mean, that's where you start to run into these challenges. And I think it's not, I think, for all of us, it's something that we're going to have to start coping with, because, there are a lot of Americans who are going to find themselves in this same situation, whether it's from a physical reason or a mental health reason. Both of them are equally legitimate, right? So if, you have a fear of catching this virus because you had a really bad experience and almost died from a sickness, it's totally legitimate, in my point of view, to be fearful of catching this virus, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to be extra guarded, and some people might think you're a little crazy, and you might have fear in going out to try to get groceries, to do these things. All of these things may create a ton of anxiety in your life, but you have to figure out a way to be able to navigate it, because if you don't, then you're not able to continue to live, right? And that's the catch-22 in this situation. And really the catch-22, with veterans who are dealing with PTSD, because what it really comes back to, PTSD, a lot of the times, is about control, out of fear of, and not having control. And I know that sounds kind of crazy and to say it in the way that I just did, but that's the best way that I can describe it, is that a lot of the issues that drive people's PTSD are derived from fear. And
let's explain to the listeners, just really quick, not to cut you off, but PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. So anything post-traumatic, anything traumatic, like fear, loss, death of a loved one, sudden death, in danger of your life, assault,
it can
anything.
Be a car accident, right? It could be a car accident where, someone gets seriously injured or not. It's just, it just depends. PTSD, and this is, I think, one of the things largely people get confused on what it is because they hear PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.